So we were talking about the different ways that we try to reduce dissonance, and we're starting to talk about minimal justification for action. I think this is the more complicated of the three. Now, the starts off here with a kind of a different way of thinking about how it is that we change ourselves. Festinger posited that, right, first of all, conventional wisdom says that first how we change ourselves is you have to change your attitude, right? So I remember my mom used to say something like garbage in, garbage out, meaning if you do have bad attitude, you're going to produce bad things. Festinger reverses this. He says rather than changing our attitude and thinking behavior will follow, first we need to change our behavior, and if we change our behavior, attitude will follow. He said that minimal justification actually ends up creating a different belief as opposed to kind of what we call a maximum justification, right? Some of this relates to post-decision rationalization. So if we change the way that we act, our beliefs tend to follow because of post-decision rationalization. An example I can think of this is I used to be a smoker. I used to be a pretty heavy smoker. And when I was a pretty heavy smoker, I believed very firmly in smokers' right to smoke wherever they wanted to smoke, right? Especially in public buildings, right? Restaurants, etc. Once I stopped smoking, and I'd stopped smoking for a while, my attitude completely changed. Right, after that, my belief kind of became, well, right, you can't infringe on the rights of those people who don't smoke, etc. And what happened here is it was my behavior that changed, which led to a change in my attitude, right? And what we have there is minimal justification for it. Festinger says that if we have minimal justification for changing an action, we're more likely to internalize that action. So the difference between, right, when your parents, when you do something bad and you get a spanking, right, well, that does kind of suck and we hate it, but it's always worse, for example, when your parents say, I'm really disappointed in you, right? Well, the reason for that, says Festinger, is because we take that on in a different kind of way. That's more likely to change our attitude because what's happened there is we've gotten less for that specific change. So they talk about this experiment of in Stanford, where it's the would I lie for a dollar experiment, where what they did is they got these guys together, and what they did is they said, we're working on an experiment. They said, first of all, we need you to do something here for the purposes of science, and it was something really menial, boring task, right, like fitting shapes to other shapes, and really dreadful. And so what ends up happening is then they get these guys, after doing this for an hour, they say, hey, you know what, we're supposed to have someone coming in after you to do this as well, but that person canceled and we can't finish the experiment if not. Would you tell this other person that you had a really good time doing this, and thereby kind of rope them into doing this as well? And so, right, the guys say no, right, whatever, and they say, well, we'll pay you to do it. One guy they offer $1, and another guy they offer $20. Now, this is 1950s, and so that equals more. It'd probably be equivalent to like $5 and $100 today. Well, upon being paid, these people do it, right? And they lie to this woman and say, you should do this experiment. It's a lot of fun. And when they go back to these people a week later, right, and they ask them to say how they felt about the experiment, right? Well, who do you think reports actually enjoying the experiment more, right? It might seem intuitive to say the person for $20 would, but actually the person who receives $1 says that they had a better time. Now, why would that be? Well, because if you are able to, you do it for $100 or so, that's a lot to a college student. You don't need to have a rationalization beyond that. If you're willing to lie to someone for $1, right, that just kind of makes you a bad person, right? You don't really get that much out of it. So your attitude is likely to shift, and you're going to remember the event being more fun because it makes you feel better about telling someone else that it. What we have, there's minimal justification leading to a change in attitude, right, and bringing together this cognitive dissonance. Now, there are a few revisions to this theory, and these are kind of important. The theory posits that the reason that we actually do this, right, that we engage in cognitive dissonance, is because we like to be rational. A couple people have said, no, they really like this idea, right? The theory makes sense, but our motivation for it is a bit different. That we're not really concerned about rationality as people. So the first revision says psychological, says, right? Says we're not rational, we're rationalizing. And it's a psychological work that we like to have a coherent narrative about who we are, right? That makes sense of our experience for other people. And has nothing to do with our actions being rational, but instead the fact that we rationalize them. We put them together into a coherent narrative. And we're going to talk about that, especially when we talk about narrative paradigm later on in this semester. Personal responsibility. There could be social animals, right? Maybe it's not the illogical or psychological effects that cause dissonance, but instead the realization that we hurt other people. We're social animals and we feel responsible for other people. So in the experiment, right, the Would I Lie for a Dollar, maybe it's the social ethic that someone else feels connected to someone else rather than a psychological or a rational experience that motivates us to reduce dissonance. Finally, self-affirmation, which is we like to have a high moral image of ourselves. Right? We like to have overall self-esteem that justifies our behavior, and we have a sense of right or wrong that helps us guide through the world. And we don't like to think about ourselves as wrong. This is an objective theory, so let's run it through our criteria. Does it give us a good explanation of the data? This is very verifiable through experiments, right? It's something that's been demonstrated over and over again. So yes, I think high explanation of the data, and it also seems to ring true with our everyday lives. So does it help us predict future events? I more or less, right? It does say if we experience cognitive dissonances, we're going to take one of these three steps to try to reduce our dissonance. Relative simplicity? Yes, that is a big question why we don't act the way that we think sometimes. And it's relatively simple in really helping us, boiling this down to a much easier kind of formula to understand why it is that we do this. Hypothesis that can be tested, it's kind of weak on that. People say it's difficult to test this hypothesis because it's really hard to prove like what's going on in people's head and what's motivating them to do what it is that they're doing. Finally, practical utility. Does it help us in our everyday lives? I think it does a really good job of helping us in our everyday lives. This is always one of those theories at the end of the semester that people say, right? That's one that really stuck with me and really made me reflect on my own kind of performances as a human and why I act the way that I do. So hopefully it has some practical utility for you as well.